Airplane pilots of Reddit, what was your biggest we're all fucked up moment that you survived and your passengers didn't notice? This was about 7 years ago now. I took my brother and 2 cousins up for a short sightseeing flight one morning in a Cessna 172. I knew there was some weather coming in, so I wanted to get it over with quickly. About 20 minutes in I noticed the clouds getting worse and then some lightning off in the distance. Definitely time to head back. Heading back I radioed my intentions. Uncontrolled airport but with info, and someone radioed back with the current winds. It didn't compute what they said, and in retrospect I should have asked for clarification. Get back to the airport and as I'm on final I realize just how bad the wind is. Having a hard time keeping on central line and eventually go around on the first try. By now I'm starting to sweating bullets and planning on rerouting if the next attempt doesn't go well. I make sure to turn the intercom off so my cousins in the back can't hear how panicked I'm becoming, though I did keep my cool through the whole thing. On second attempt I've got the rudder pegged to the left and managed to get the wheels on the ground safely. I taxi to park, shut down, jump out, and start shaking with adrenaline and let out a huge sigh of relief. Cousins had no idea what just happened. It was just an exciting flight to them. My brother kind of knew what was going on, and I let him in on what I was thinking later. Apparently I had an audience of guys from the FBO watching me as well, probably yelling at me to go somewhere else. I'm honestly surprised sometimes I managed that landing with no incidents, especially since that was basically my first crosswind landing. Once, departing Burning Man with a couple of passengers, my engine conked out. I didn't even follow the engine out checklist. I glanced at the fuel pressure gauge, didn't like what I saw, hit the switch for the auxiliary fuel pump, and it came back to life. The whole incident was over so fast the passengers never even noticed. I wouldn't call it a we're all fucked moment, though. Worst case scenario, I would have had to set it back down on the playa, which is pretty flat terrain as far as the eye can see. Commercial pilot here. Not the most exciting story, but because there aren't any good ones yet I'll reply. I was flying myself and 3 passengers over the Appalachian Mountain on a clear day. We hit some mild turbulence and the door opened to the cabin. The passengers all started panicking, so I basically said chill out guys, this happens all the time, and tried closing the door. I couldn't get it shut while also flying the plane, so I simple landed at a nearby airfield and closed it on the ground. After the trip was over I told the passengers that was the first time that had ever happened to me and I was slightly panicked as well. I was in the process of getting my PPL, private pilot license, and I was flying circuits solo. Before I took off, the CFO of the flight school asked me if I was sure it was a good idea to fly. It's pretty windy. I was flying a Cessna 152 on a day with wind pushing 15 knots and turbulence around 20. I honestly don't know what I or anyone at the flight school was thinking letting me, 16 years old, take off. Anyways, a few bumpy circuits go by with no problem. I actually got some great practice landing in turbulence. So the last circuit of the day, I'm on final with full flaps doing the absolute minimum speed for approach in a 152, not taking into consideration that the air is super turbulent. For those who don't know, when it's bumpy you should be going a little faster on approach than usual. Anyways, I'm quite close to the ground, maybe 300 to 400 feet, and I can hear the wind blowing over the sound of the engine. Suddenly, no wind. I had just lost 15 to 20 knots of almost direct headwind on final approach with absolutely no airspeed to spare. I remember my shirt sleeves looked like they were inflating and the plane's stall warning started screaming at me. The controls became totally useless, like a limp computer joystick. Thankfully I had my hand on the throttle like my instructor taught me, and for whatever instinctual reason, good instructor probably, I gently pushed the throttle all the way and slightly lowered the nose. All of this took place in the span of about 5 seconds. I remember what I did, but not thinking about doing it. It was like when you drive somewhere and you suddenly realize you've arrived without remembering driving. Damn scary. Anyways, I landed the plane just fine and went home and took a nap. My parents said I was pale as a ghost when I got home. Flying is fun until it isn't. There was a crash caused by a pilot waking up. As he woke he saw the bright light dead ahead and, still half asleep, assumed it was another plane coming at him. He quickly put the plane into a dive to avoid it and ended up crashing the plane. The bright light was Venus, which was very bright in the pre-dawn morning. I have a weird story from the perspective of a passenger. I was on a really tiny turboprop plane, maybe 10 rows, 2 seats on one side, 1 seat on the other side. On the side with 2 seats, the front row passengers had to sit with their backs against the cockpit wall, facing row 2. I was in row 2, so all 4 of us in the first 2 rows were facing each other with essentially a pile of legs in the middle. At some point during the flight, it got rocky. Then the plane did one big drop, and all of a sudden all 4 of us heard a loud, angry alarm go off in the cockpit because we were so close to it. I know the passengers up against the cockpit wall heard it because I was looking them in the eyes and they both had the same look I did. Holy fuck, we might be dying today. None of the other passengers on the plane were close enough to hear the alarm going off, so they remained unaware. The plane righted itself and the alarm turned off. The rest of the flight was normal and the pilot never said anything, so I have no idea what actually happened or if we all really were about to die. To this day I hate when I have to fly in a tiny turboprop. I actually caused the same thing to happen when I was a kid. My dad was taking a small turboprop plane, company jet, from Kansas City to Oklahoma City and I got to go along for the ride. Once we were cruising, I asked the pilot if I could sit up front and see everything in action. So, I'm in the co-pilot seat and quickly leaned over at some point to look out the window. When I turned, my arm bumped the co-pilot controls and knocked the plane out of autopilot. Instantly, the plane's nose dropped a bit and alarms went off like crazy. Scared the shit out of everyone on board. LOL, that was also the day that Oklahoma City was destroyed by an F5 tornado. We flew out about 20 minutes before it hit. I remember flying out and seeing crazy ass dark clouds in every direction. Fun day. Was learning to fly when I worked for the governor, so on my first flight with me taking off, we've been climbing for about 5 minutes and we're going through some gentle turns when instructor says, "We're going to head back, I don't feel well." He takes over the stick and he looks ashen. He then starts to breath erratically and says I need to help him control the plane. He radios tower and up till now I'm thinking it's a prank. Mayday, mayday. He talks me through the whole thing. I'm trying to talk to the tower, repeat info, read gauges, remember lessons, listen to him and hope he don't pass out. I was shitting myself. Takeoff is one thing, but landing? We land like a kangaroo with a rocket up its ass. I'm surprised the wheels didn't fold. Must have been 4 big bounces, but it's a big runway. Scrub speed, finally get the plane to stop and instructor passes out. He had a heart attack. He survived but only for a few months before I heard he passed away in his sleep, but he got us down. I never continued the lessons. My friend's girlfriend is a flight attendant and they had one trip where they ran out of alcohol. They were worried people would get mad or freak out because some people heavily rely on alcohol to help with the nerves of flying. But none of the passengers noticed because after they served the last drink nobody ordered anything else. It's not a crazy life or death scenario, but I thought it was an amusing anecdote about the passengers not realizing something. This entire story occurred in less than 10 seconds and should have ended with headlines on CNN. Military pilot and not commercial, but it still could have ended in a disaster. Flying a CH-47D Chinook helicopter in Iraq mid-July 2008 when the temp was over 130 degrees. Packed full with 36 passengers at an altitude of only 100 feet and speed of 140 knots. Lower and faster than you'd ever fly in the US. We hit a thermal pocket of warm air that pushed us up, so I nosed the cyclic, looks like a joystick between your legs, forward to maintain altitude. I was a brand new pilot flying with a combat vet who wanted me to maintain altitude of 100 feet almost exactly, so no higher than 120 or lower than 80 feet. Nosing the aircraft down kept us from going higher, but we immediately hit a downdraft and the aircraft started to fall like a rock. I pulled back on the cyclic as hard as I could to get the nose up, but it hit my body armor and wouldn't go back any further. I watched the altimeter drop all the way to 19 feet and miraculously we started falling and began to climb at the last possible second. During the debrief, the other pilot, now one of my closest friends, who had well over 1,000 combat hours, told me he's never been so close to dying before. I wasn't shook up until I heard that. Even typing this today gives me chills. I got sick as the student. Didn't almost die, but I threw up all over the cockpit of a Cessna while taking flying lessons when I was 16. Never went back after that either. It was a really bumpy ride with turbulence and we were doing touch and goes. It was midsummer. I already didn't feel great that day. Temperatures were in the 90s and the plane was uncomfortable to begin with because the owner was 6 feet 6 inches. Anyway, I thought I was doing fine, but as we were going in for a landing we hit a pocket of air that moved my stomach the right direction and it just started coming up. I tried to reach for a bag, but my mouth filled up and it just flew out. Lessons ended and I spent the rest of the afternoon detailing the interior of a plane. When I first flew I had to try so hard not to puke. When we finally got down the instructor looks at me and I'm like dead pale but trying really hard to look like none of it fazed me. Apparently we hit a lot more turbulence than normal and he was impressed I didn't puke. LOL, nobody tells you that when you fly it feels like you're on a fucking roller coaster in those two-seaters. Uncoordinated turn and all the fuel went to one side of the plane. choked both engines, sputtered and cut out 3,000 feet high, so brought back the coordination and pointed down a bit. The started back up. Yikes. Mine is from many years ago when I was a student pilot. I was 14 I think at the time. I had about 15ish hours done and getting close to soloing for the first time, but still had a few hours and more landings to practice. I was doing some basics and getting ready to come back with my instructor to practice some touch and goes for a bit. Coming back through, we had to pass through DTW's Bravo airspace, means need permission to go through it. A few minutes before I was about to call for permission, my instructor got really quiet. I looked over at him and he looked really bad. I thought he was going to puke, so looking for a bag. But then I notice he isn't breathing. I figure out where I am at and call up DTW approach. Declare a medical emergency and that my instructor was not breathing. I also told them I am a student and never landed on my own before, and never in a large airport. Detroit approach was amazing at helping me. They gave me an option for DTW or Willow, but Willow would have added a good 5-10 minutes since I was coming in from the SE. Opted for DTW and they were great at giving me vectors while also getting the big jets out of the way. I remember hearing them tell several planes to go around and several more into a hold. Anyway, did my approach and made the most butter smooth landing I have ever made in my life. Even till this day. Ambulance was right there on the taxi waiting for me. Turns out my instructor, who was only 25, had a heart attack. He ended up being okay. All in all, from first call to him in the ambulance was less than 10 minutes thanks to ATC and DTW Tower. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more Reddit addiction. Also leave a comment on your scariest airplane experiences.